Ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, and thank you to today's Small Business Essential webinar. Today's topic is Protect Your Small Business from Fraud. My name is TJ Daniels, and I'm the director for the Iowa Center's Women's Business Center. The Iowa Center's Women's Business Center is funded in part through a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Small Business Administration. You will receive an email after this event from my colleague, Katie Hinches. Thank you for attending today's session, information on how to connect to our speaker, as well as a form to complete. Please do us a big favor and take some time to fill this form out. This information allows us to continue providing free educational programming for small business owners in Iowa. Now go ahead and please take some time to locate the chat function on your Zoom screens so you could join the conversation by asking questions or adding comments. Also, feel free to introduce yourself and your business in the chat and include your website or social media page so we could visit and learn more about your business and network. Now, a little information about today's speaker. Megan Rector with Regions Bank. She is an education team manager and has been with Regions for 10 years. She also has business experience as her husband is also an entrepreneur. Megan, thank you so much for spending time with us today, and the screen is now yours.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that awesome introduction. And just so all of you know, I have grown up in business all my life. So my stepdad owns a business, my husband owns a few businesses, and I help with all of those. So definitely some experience in the business background. But one of my passions, or my biggest passion, is providing financial advice, guidance, and education. And I love that TJ asked for you to put your name of your business and your website and things in the chat, because that is going to really help me understand the types of businesses we have on, and I can tailor this presentation a little bit more toward your business group. So thank you for that. I look forward to seeing those in the chat. I will also be using chat a lot. We want this session to be interactive, and we want you to ask questions, and we'll be asking for some opinions and some insight. So definitely have your chat open. We'll be using that quite frequently, and be sure to chat to host and panelists so that we can see those, or to everyone. So again, like TJ stated, my name is Megan Rector. I'm with Regions Bank. Been here for quite a while, and today we're going to talk about protecting your small business from fraud, which is something that I hate that we have to talk about, but it's something that's necessary to talk about and keep your business safe. So thank you so much for spending your valuable time with us today. I know the ask was for you to go ahead and put your business stuff in the chat, and I'll give you just a second to do that, because I also have a QR code for you to scan. And this is part of our Regions Financial Health Score partnership. So if you scan this QR code and you enter that banker ID listed, this will give you your business financial health score. Now, it's on a person, the questions are more personal related, but if you want, you can think of it as your business while you're taking the self-evaluation, and then you'll get a feel for what areas you need to improve on for your business. And then the very special part, or the gift of doing this QR code self-evaluation, is at the very end, the very last question, it asks you, would you like a banker to follow up with you? So because you're attending this session today that the Iowa Center is hosting, you get access to a one-on-one, no cost, no obligation conversation with a Regions banker. We'll connect you with someone local so that they can help. We actually have someone there fairly close to your area, and we will have them reach out to you and connect so you can have a one-on-one conversation. Because let's be honest, this is going to be a lot of general information, but if you have a specific question that you want to talk through, we want to offer that one-on-one availability to you. So scan the QR code, put in the banker ID, which is C6356. That ensures that your request comes to me, and I can then have a banker reach out to you from there. And we actually do a pretty quick turnaround time on that. We try to follow up within 48 hours. So They'll reach out to you and schedule an appointment. They can meet virtually. You can meet via phone. Again, you do not have to bank with Regions to take advantage of that. There's no obligation to bank with us. It's just some free advice, guidance, and education that we want to offer. Thanks so much, Shelly Brown. I appreciate you putting that in the chat. So I'm going to give it just a minute. I know you guys were trying to type your stuff into the chat, and now we're asking you to scan a QR code. So I'll just I'll give it a moment and let you guys time to do all of those things. While you're doing that, I'm going to put some resources in the chat as well. So we have a handout that goes with today's session that you may have received prior to, but I also want to put the link for that in the chat so that you can have that also. And throughout this session, I'm going to be putting a lot of things in the chat because I want you guys to have a lot of resources. And then at the end, I'll show you how to save that chat so you can have all those links that I shared with you, and you can go check them out afterwards too. So thanks so much. I see some more businesses putting some names in the chat. So thank you so much for doing that. Okay, I'll give it just another minute and then we'll move on and jump into the presentation. Let's see. Okay, if you want, you can just give me an emoji or let me know in the chat if you've already had time to scan that QR code. If you're a really good multitasker and you've already had time to scan that QR code and put in that banker ID, that way I know it's safe to move on. But I want to give everybody a chance because that is your way to get a conversation with a Regions banker. So you'll have an opportunity to do that at the end also. So we'll go ahead and move on and get started. Okay, so got to get the legal stuff out of the way. This information is general in nature. It is not intended to be legal or tax advice. I am not a lawyer nor an accountant. But I am a licensed banker with lots of experience, so I will help you as much as possible. If you do need help with tax rules or specifications like that, please just visit irs.gov for those current tax rules. The agenda today, we are going to focus on these big questions. So what are the ways that you can help prevent fraud? And what are the ways that fraud can happen to your business? So how can you protect your business, and what are the ways that it can happen? So is there anything else about fraud that you guys are interested in learning about? I want you to put that in the chat. So if there's anything specific fraud related, go ahead and put that in the chat and we'll make sure that we cover it. So protecting yourself, that's what we're going to talk about first. So running a small business definitely takes sacrifice, money, long hours, talent, and drive. You all know that. You have worked hard to grow your business, and the last thing you want is someone to steal from you. It is very important to protect yourself and your business. This is why you're here today, to learn about the common types of fraud that is perpetrated against small businesses and to prepare in your fight against it. So what is fraud? Who can answer what is the definition technically of fraud? You know, that seems like an easy one, but when you stop and think about it, it's kind of hard to put it in words, right? One of the most common types of fraud, especially these days, I'm sure you guys, you can raise your hand or put in the chat. Has anybody received those emails or text messages saying, hey, you won this big prize, just click on this link and put in this code and go to this website and then we'll send you something? Or the same thing happens to businesses. So cyber fraud is the #1 type of fraud. So cyber thieves steal money directly from your bank accounts, and we're going to actually show you how that happens later on in the presentation. Employees can also steal money through internal access to accounts, and customers can also steal money. So there's three different avenues that people can take money from your small business. So we're going to talk a little bit about, what that looks like and how to prepare for that. So what if I told you that there was at least a 50% chance that you would be a victim of fraud? You may think that you're currently protecting yourself, but are you really protecting yourself? So each year, the Association for Fraud for Financial Professionals conducts an annual payments and fraud control survey. These are the results, as you can see. Now, it's been a while since it's been updated, and actually the trend is up. So if you look at that, we're working on getting that updated actually this month. If you look at that little line and see how it's going up in 2015 to 73%, and it's going up in 2016 to 74%, it's actually closer to the 80% right now. So nearly 3/4 of all organizations have been a victim of fraud. So if you have not been, consider yourself lucky. If you have been, then you're not alone. We do have some requests in the chat. So if you're getting paid by multiple vendors using ACH or direct deposit and sharing copies of voided checks with them. So anytime you're doing activities like that, think about, you're giving them your account number, routing number, but you have to, right? Because you have to get paid. But how do you prevent that from happening? And there's actually something called positive pay that we will talk about here shortly, specifically that can help that and can help control that. So that is a really good question. And that is a question that we get all the time. Thank you so much for putting that in the chat, because we will for sure talk about that in just a little bit. Okay, so how do these losses impact your bottom line? There is a direct impact. According to those Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, the median loss, the average loss in 2014 per business was $145,000 a year, and about 5% revenue annually lost to fraud. So you have to ask yourself, if you could afford to lose that much of your profit, and then how important is it that you protect yourself, protect your business, and protect the bottom line from those losses. So while the volume of checks written is declining, companies reported fraud loss indicated that losses from checks are actually increasing. And like I said, we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Internal fraud, sometimes called bookkeeper fraud, is a very real threat also. Many times this type of fraud goes undetected for long periods of time. The average length of someone who's conducting bookkeeper fraud is 18 months. So you can imagine how much money that they can have the opportunity to steal if they are doing it for 18 months and it goes undetected. So obviously, the longer it lasts, the more financial damage that it's going to cause. So education is key to fraud prevention, and that's what you're doing here today. You have the link to the handout, so you can reference that. It is a preventing fraud worksheet, and it provides a 360-degree view for small businesses. Unfortunately, preventing fraud doesn't become urgent for most companies until they find themselves in a loss situation, which means you don't really think about preventing fraud until fraud happens. And then it's something that we talk about, which is totally normal, right? We don't think about things until something like that happens. And they're like, oh, I need to take care of that. So, but we want to help you with what do you need to know. And so the questions on that handout give you kind of a starting point and a checklist of thinking, what do I need to change? Or what can I start to look at? Or how can I take advantage of like the banks that I work with a lot? And it doesn't have to be Regions Bank. I'll talk today a little bit about region specific products only because those are the ones that I know for sure. But if you work with another bank, check with your bank, because we're going to talk specific products that can help you prevent fraud. And of course, Regions is not the only one that offers that. So I don't want you to feel obligated to talk with us. You can go and talk to your bank and see if they offer the same exact thing. So let's talk about each one of these. So there's internal controls, funds transfer, there's vendors. We already had somebody bring that up in the chat. They want your account number, routing number so that they can pay you, but then what's to stop them from taking money out? There's email and malware that people try to use. There's a lot of fraud trends, and then there's how to protect your private information. So we're going to talk about all of these in this presentation. So bookkeeper fraud is the number two. Like I said, cyber fraud has moved up to number one. Bookkeeper fraud used to be number one, but it's hard. I know it's so hard to imagine an employee stealing from you, especially if that employee has earned your trust. But it happens, and it's typically those employees that you trust the most. Studies show that the smallest organizations are hit hardest by the losses. Businesses only recover funds from internal fraud about 50% of the time. So let's talk about how it happens. So a smaller business typically employs, fewer anti-fraud controls than a larger business. So that increases your vulnerability to fraud. Small businesses are also more likely to give employee full authority to issue and reconcile payments, especially checks. So I know this to be true. And just like my daughter's school, for example, it's a very small school. I'm on the board. There's 3 or 4 people that have access to those checks, but 3 or 4 people is still too much. But we do preventative measures, like every check has to have dual signatures. That's something that you can do to prevent. So that way you have 2 people signing off if a check needs to be written. So that's one thing. Employees may also, perpetrate other types of schemes using the business credentials. Now, we've seen in the past where employees write themselves checks and it's written off as just payroll or something else or a reimbursement. A lot of times they write them as reimbursements, and then it's overlooked by the business owner because might be a typical thing that happens, but they've just increased that amount a little bit where they're taking more than they're supposed to be. So personal financial pressure is the biggest reason that most people commit fraud. And honestly, guys, only 19% of people in the US are financially secure or feel financially secure. So that leaves it open to a large percentage, 79% of people that maybe, or 71% of people that might be interested in committing fraud. So it can happen. We see it all the time. So they do a rationalization. They think about, well, I'll pay it back. We've actually had people steal money from the bank, and they'll take money out of their cash drawer. They won't report the outage, and they'll get caught just by chance of an audit, because we do random audits at the bank, and they'll get caught and they'll say, well, I was going to pay it back Friday. I was going to pay it back Friday when I got paid. And unfortunately, that's not how it works, but that's how they rationalize it in their head. So studies have shown that 87% of internal fraud is committed by someone who has never been in trouble with the law. So if you think, oh, this person's never been in trouble, never had anything happen, just think about that. 87% happens to somebody who's never been in trouble with the law. Now, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on how to prevent bookkeeper fraud? You can put your examples or your guesses in the chat. How do you think, what are some things that you can do to prevent bookkeeper fraud? Because we're getting ready to start sharing some best practices and some things that you can do to help prevent those things from happening. Have good checks and balances in place. Absolutely. That is probably number one. Always double check the bookkeeper work and know your numbers. Absolutely. That's something that a lot of small business owners, they're so busy. Like I said, my husband owns a small business and he's running around. He leaves the house at 6 in-the-morning. Sometimes he doesn't get back till 7 or 8, and he's running around and doing things for his business, and he doesn't have time to sit down and audit those books. Required vacation. Yes, that is something that we're going to talk about that most people don't think about, because if they're out of the office and someone else is forced to take over, or if you're taking over and there's something that is happening on a regular basis that you can catch, that is the perfect way. That's the perfect time to catch them. So requiring them to take like a week's long vacation or 2 weeks long vacation, that's a very good point. Thank you so much for bringing that up. So here are some additional best practices to implement that provide dual control. So in the banking world, dual control is like the main word, because you don't do anything by yourself in a bank. So in the bank, for instance, if we're going to go to the vault, we have to have two people. The first person has the first half and the second person has the second half of the combination. You can't do anything by yourself. And that limits fraud because two people then have to actively agree to commit this fraud, right? And that's not as likely as just having one person do it by themselves. So if you have one sole person that has access to all of your checks and your accounting and your any bookkeeping that you do or your bank accounts, if you just have one person, then that increases the likelihood of fraud right there. So never ever sign blank checks. So example, Joe wrote company checks without the need for approval, and Joe, the bookkeeper, could write a check to anybody he wanted to and didn't need the owner's approval. It is very easy to add a second signature line and require two signatures on every check. So at least two people in the office are verifying that check needs to be wrote, or maybe the second signature is you, and you set that expectation so you can see everything that comes in. That's part of the dual control, adding the dual control on checks. So the other one is to make sure all employees are aware and adhere to internal controls and finance reporting. So although it was not specifically mentioned in the example, we can assume no internal controls and reporting were in place because employees were able to steal money. So if you have internal controls and financial reporting, meaning you're looking over the books, someone else is looking over the books, or you have two people that are one that's auditing the other one, or vice versa, then you can guarantee that those two people have to have that access, and it's a lot less likely to have bookkeeper fraud occur. So restricting employee access to accounting systems and online functions. You can check with your bank, but I understand the need to have like your assistant or your bookkeeper log into your online banking accounts. But what you can do, there is something that you can do where you can track who was logged in when the changes were made. So talk to your financial institution. At Regions, we have that where you can give your bookkeeper access to your bank accounts online, but we would be able to track every time they logged in instead of you, and every transaction that they did, so that you could go back and you could check. So check with your bank to see if you can do that. And that's called a single sign-on, where each person has their own sign-on and you can track it. So also implement an approval process for new vendors. So anytime you bring on a new vendor to your company, make sure that you're meeting with them and you're talking to them about how they're paying you, what's the process, and make sure you're checking with them on the controls that they have in place, because one of the biggest times that businesses lose money is when they involve a third-party vendor and that third-party vendor doesn't have good controls in place. And then that third-party vendor gets hacked, and then you get hacked. So, and that's actually in the big Target scheme, when all the debit cards got stolen, the debit card numbers got stolen, that happened because of a third-party vendor that Target had hired on, and they didn't check, or they didn't know to check the credentials of that third-party vendor. So be very careful with third-party vendors. Now, the other thing on that, and this goes back to the chat question we had, you can set up something called positive pay. So definitely talk to your bank if you don't already have this in place. But it is a system called positive pay, where when payments or when expenses start coming out of your bank account, you have to go in and approve those before they happen. So you get a report. However often you want to get that report. We have a lot of businesses that get a report daily, and they have to approve all of the expenses that are coming out of their bank account automatically. And what that does is it stops anything that's not supposed to be coming out from coming out. I know it takes extra work, but just think about the work that it would take to recover that loss if something did start coming out. And there's limitations you can put on it. So you can say, we have a lot of businesses, a lot of bigger businesses that say, I only want to have to approve it if it's over 5,000, or I only want to have to approve it if it's over 1,000. So you would only get that report if it was over a certain dollar amount. Does that make sense? So we talked about a lot of things. We talked about dual control. We talked about the approval process, the accounting process, and we talked about positive pay, and we talked about single sign-on. Does anybody have any questions with that before we move on? Okay, question. If someone gets into your account and pays out, then what is to stop them from approving the payment as well? Okay, good question. So you would not want the person, like your bookkeeper wouldn't be the person to approve that positive pay report. You would be the person to approve that positive pay report. Or so you wouldn't want the same person who's writing checks and paying the vendors to be the person who approves the positive pay report. You would want that to be separate. Sorry, I could have explained that better. Thank you for asking. Okay, so now let's talk about some more best practices so that you guys can help prevent fraud. So checks are one of the most vulnerable instruments for a small business. And that might, to you, you might be like, oh, what? Why? Like a check, like it's much safer to write a paper check and hand it to somebody than do something online. But they are very easily stolen from mailboxes. So if you're getting vendors that are paying you by paper checks, people go steal those from mailboxes. They steal them off the desk. They use your account number and your routing number to counterfeit checks and actually create a different check that nobody would ever know is a different check because it has your account number and routing number on it. I explain it like this. And I had to have this conversation with my mother because my mother she only writes checks. She doesn't pay anything online. She doesn't trust the security of doing things online. Let's put it that way. So I had this conversation with her a while back, and I said, if you pay someone with a check, so if you pay the dog sitter with a check and you hand them a paper check, that dog sitter now has your name, your address, your bank account number, and your routing number, all right there on that one piece of paper. So now we have all of these online tools that we can go, we have all of these online shopping that we have. You all know how easy it is to go to Amazon or go to Walmart.com or go to any of the places online, and you can actually pay with an e-check. And so now that person has your name, your address, your account number, and your routing number. So checks are not always the most secure. They're actually more vulnerable than online activity. So we have a question in the chat. So for solo business owners, it can be challenging to have dual control process. Do you recommend outsourcing some accounting functions to have the higher control and process? That is really that's a personal preference, I guess. I can tell you the examples that I have. For a long time, my husband was the only one who ran his business, and he had people that helped every now and then, but he didn't really have an actual bookkeeper in place or anything like that. I was trying to help him do his books while also doing my job. So we did choose to have an accountant that he uses a long time ago. We chose to have an accountant where they have access to the bank account and things like that we trust. And we also go and we audit all of that activity once a year when we sit down, or sometimes more than once a year when we sit down and do taxes for the business. So we're going through all of that and making sure everything. Now they don't have the authority to pay things or approve things, but they do have the authority to basically review the bank statements and put in, basically do the QuickBooks for them. Do the accounting piece. So that's something that's a personal preference. He has employees now that work with him, and he still has that accountant that does it just because he knows that it's going to get done right. And he verifies, and he is the auditor, so to speak, to that accountant, him and I, when we sit down and go through those financials. So we compare our bank statements to what the accountant has. So sometimes that can be really good and helpful to help keep track of things. And then you don't typically have to worry about an inside employee, having access to those things. You're working with an accountant firm, and that's what we have, an accounting firm. I don't typically recommend just a one person accounting show, because that's the other big reason, opening up to fraud if it's just one person. So we have an accounting firm that goes through and audits it, and it's really not that as expensive as you would think to have them handle those things. So that's a good question. So checks are the most vulnerable. Like we said, electronic payments are actually a better alternative to checks. But we know that there aren't electronic options for all types of payments. So you'll most likely need to protect yourself for the checks that you do write. Now, the other piece of that is if you are writing checks, the positive pay works with the check writing also. So you would get a report, and that has saved a lot of our big organizations that we work with. So let me just give you, let's think about a big fast food franchise, okay? So a big fast food franchise around here, and they have probably thousands of employees, right? There's a lot of franchises, there's a lot of employees, they write a lot of paychecks. So the one that we work with has positive pay in place. And there's so much fraud with those checks that has saved them. They have declined more than $10,000 in checks that have been presented in the last 6 months. So think about that. That's $10,000 that they would have lost if they wouldn't have had the positive pay in place. Because what happens is these employees, they'll do what's called wash the checks. It's basically where, well, there's a couple different options. You can literally wash the ink off of the check. I mean, with some chemical way that they figure out, and then they change the amount. They change the dollar amount. They type in a new dollar amount. Some of these are even handwritten checks. And so they just add a 0 to the end of the number and try to get more money that way. So they get really creative. And they have a process where, the 2 bookkeepers for this franchise goes through and verifies those checks against the actual payroll checks that were written. And they've saved $10,000 in the last 6 months. So just think about little things like that will help you. If you just had a report every day to approve and it wasn't there very many items, that might be something to definitely talk to your bank about. So cyber attacks, everybody wonders how those happen, and we're going to walk through really quickly. It's a quick slideshow, but just a step-by-step showing you how it happens. But before we go into that, how cyber attacks happen and what you can do to protect yourself from those, do we have any questions on what we've talked about so far? I don't see any so far. Okay, so we'll move on. If you do have a question that comes up, just put it in the chat. So businesses are targets, unfortunately, and small businesses are really targets because cyber attackers know that they don't have as many things in place to protect themselves. So computers in a commercial environment can more often contain confidential data on vendors, clients, employees that the thieves can use in their other schemes. So what are their methods of attack? So these words are going to sound, or the phishing word, I've always thought was funny, and it sounds kind of silly, but hopefully it'll make you remember it. That is the #1 way that cyber attacks happen. So phishing emails with malicious links or attachments. So these emails look legitimate. They look like they're from a trusted source. An example is UPS telling you that you have a package that they couldn't deliver. Other examples is like the Federal Reserve saying a wire or ACH transaction was rejected. Some of them are the IRS saying your tax payment is past due and you have to click on the link to see the attachment. And so what they do is they install malware into this link. And the second you click on it, it is installed into your operating system. and then they can attack your computer and see everything that you type and everything that you do. Regions actually does this to us all the time to test us. And I've probably fallen for it a couple times over my 10 years because some of them are really convincing. So for example, one of the emails was, you have a package. We've tried to locate you at this address. And it was actually the branch address that I work at. We've tried to contact you at this address, which was my home address. Please update, your information. Please click on this link and update your information so we can send you your package. So I thought, oh, well, they have my address already. Like I'll go click on that and make sure that they have what they need. And I got the big alert that this was a fraud attempt and this was a test. And so oftentimes those emails, and you may not even have any idea that you just clicked on something bad, and then now they're in your computer. So a good best practice is, if you get emails, when you get those emails from those UPS, FedEx, or IRS or whatever, and they're asking you to click on something or to provide information, actually go and click on the email address that it came from. And these hackers are really sophisticated. It might look like it came from irs.gov, but if you actually hover over it or click on the email address it came from, it will reveal the actual abcdefg1234.com at da 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 da. So go look at the email address that it came from and see if you can see where it came from. And if it's not from a .gov email, then you know that it's fraudulent, or USPS, or you can control, or you can figure out the email based on if it's legitimate or not. Okay, so banner ads is the other way that they get to your PC, and that's clicking on an ad that pops up. Social networking sites, so Facebook or Instagram or any of those sites that come up, you've all, I'm sure, seen, if you're on Facebook, oh, I was hacked, don't click on this link in Messenger, or I got hacked, my password got hacked. So a lot of times those are people that are trying to hack your system. So how many people, just give me a little hand raise or a yes in the chat, have been hacked, social media or email account been hacked, or a Venmo account been hacked, or any kind of account like that been hacked? Probably most of the group has been, yeah, or know somebody, a friend, right? I have this one friend, she's always getting hacked on Facebook. So I'm like, okay, I'm just never clicking on any kind of link that anybody sends me. That's a best practice. So let's walk through really quickly how this happens. And we're going to go through these slides pretty quick because only a couple of things are going to change, but I think it's important for you to know. And I've always wondered, how does this really work? So the client, which is you, so you receive the malware email, you open it, see the little @ sign right here? They send an email to you, which contains a rootkit, which hacks your system. So then that rootkit, the bad guys, calls into your system, and now they can see and have control. Sometimes they can have control, but most of the time they can just see what you're doing. So the malware disables any antivirus software so that the user doesn't even know it's running. So you might have clicked on one of these things and you have no clue. So then the malware runs in the background and waits for the customer to connect to like your online business site or your iTreasury site. The thief waits for an instant message to alert them that the user is trying to log into something. So they actually create an alert. It just watches what you do on your computer all day long, and then they create an alert that alerts them when you're going to log into a bank account or log into an iTreasury account. And then they can actually see when you enter your login credentials, and they are using it, or maybe it's saying that iTreasury or banking system is down because that bank, hopefully the bank that you use has protection to notice if that account is being watched, and your bank account login site should have a little lock, and start looking for this. Now that I mention it, you'll look for it everywhere. All secure websites should have a little padlock up in the website link. So you'll notice it now that I say it, but that means that they're a safe website, and that if you are getting attacked or hacked, or if there's something like that watching, then they can actually detect that, and they'll say the system is down because they don't want you to be hacked. So it tries to see you using your login credentials, so your username and your password, so the thief is watching. And then many business systems require like security tokens for secure internet access. So the token issues a passcode that expires in 60 days, so the thief has to act quickly. Sometimes they're not successful. So if you don't log into something within 60 days, then they might not hack you, but then they no longer have access. So they could be watching you log into your bank account again, and they also could be tracking your personal information. A lot of times these cyber attackers use what's called like a money mule, and it's somebody actually in the United States, and then they're sending money to a foreign bank account, a person who really just works from home and has like a 9-to-5 job. It's their job to hack people and take their money, which is very sad. So some best practices for internet banking. What do you need to do to protect yourself? So you have a checklist on your handout, and it definitely talks about how you can, don't click on anything that you don't know where it came from. Double check and see where it came from, and see if you know that person. Don't click on any links. Don't click on any ads. Basically, don't click on anything that you need, right? That you don't need, so that you can avoid all of the issues of having the hack happen. So the handout is a checklist of best practices for small businesses. I'll put the link to that handout again in the chat. Let me get that pulled up here, and that way you can have that. And then I also have some other links. So there's some business insights articles that we have. There's also some fraud prevention resources at regions.com/stop fraud. So there's no way that I could go over all the tips and tools and best practices in a 1-hour session. So I want you guys to have all the resources that are available to you at regions.com/next step. We also have a lot of tools there as well. And all handouts will be provided in the follow-up email. Thank you so much for that. And I'm going to put just one more link, and that's our business calculators in there, business insights and where to find the business calculators. So lots of good links in the chat. And I told you that I would tell you how to save the chat. So before we finish up, I promise I'll do that. So let's talk really quickly about what can you do in the next 24 hours to help protect yourself from fraud. So what do you think is something that you've heard about during this session? The positive pay, or the single sign-on, or not clicking the malware, or checking for the vendors, checking on your vendors to see if they're secure. Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me see. Nope, those links weren't going to everyone. So let me put them in there real quick. Thank you so much for bringing that up. They were going to the host and panelists. Sorry, that was in the chat. Okay, here we go. Now we're going to put stuff in the chat. Zoom, I'm used to WebEx. Zoom's a little different. So taking me a minute to get the hang of that. I apologize. Okay, so now you have the link to the handout in the chat. You have the link to our small business calculators, and I'm going to also put the link to the Stop Fraud website. So there should be at least three going into the chat right now. Thank you. Thanks so much for that, because I wouldn't have known that if you wouldn't have mentioned that. So in fighting fraud, we are definitely all in this together. So banks and customers partner really closely. So you should really work with your bank. If you don't have a bank that you work with closely to protect your business from fraud, then Regions would love to be a resource for you. But talk to your bank and make sure you have all the things in place to help you prevent fraud. There's ACH alerts. We didn't even talk about those. You can get an alert every time an ACH comes through. There's the single sign-on, there's the positive pay, there's iTreasury services. There's all types of different products that banks have. And a lot of times, we work with small business owners all the time. And the biggest thing that we hear is, I don't want to pay for that service. And there is a cost involved to most of those services because it is extra work and extra reporting and extra items. But just put it in perspective, the small amount you are going to pay per month for those services to prevent the fraud, and put that into perspective of the numbers we talked about earlier, where businesses, you could lose up to $20,000 a year in fraud and not even know it. So just put that in perspective when you hear the cost of these. And some of the services are very low cost or no cost at all. But some things, depending on how in-depth you want to go, they do cost. They are a service that costs. The positive pay, yes, it is where you actively approve outbound payments. So positive pay means that you have to agree, you have to approve that you want to pay that. So you're getting that report, you're choosing that. So instead of just, if you're like me, random things come out of my bank account all day long personally. So subscriptions, things like that, like, oh, you paid $2.99 to iTunes for your Pandora or whatever. So in your business, things like that happen too. But if you actually get this alert or report and you stop and look at it really quickly, then you can say, okay, I want to approve that. I want to approve that. I want to approve that. Great question. Is positive pay available for personal consumers as well as businesses? Not that I know of. That's not something that Regions has. Maybe some other banks, I haven't heard of it, but it is a lot of reporting. It's a report. So all of your transactions are held each day until you review that report and approve it. So to do that for each consumer would be a very, to me, I think it would be a very costly and a lot for a financial institution. But to do that for businesses, it's a little less time consuming. So I don't think it's available for personal, but I can only talk about Regions. So your bank might have that. I would discuss it. I do know they do things like I have the option at Regions. I could get alerts. So I can get a text message or an email alert every single time something comes out of my bank account. So that's kind of like positive pay without having to approve it. At least I get to see it and I get an alert for it. And I can call and I can take care of it if something came out that wasn't supposed to. So I would definitely check into getting alerts too on your personal accounts. Good questions. Okay, so congratulations. We've talked about a lot of ways that fraud can happen, and we've talked about how you can protect your business as well and yourself. So there are lots of tools and resources. Like I mentioned, our regions.com website, it is just regions.com/next step. And I will put that into the chat as well. So, oh yeah, the calls from California who want to pay half of my utilities for me. I swear I got one of those this morning. That's so funny you brought that up, because I was like, why is somebody from California calling me? And then I got a voicemail, and let me see, it was from Lake Arrowhead, California is where my call came from this morning, and they wanted to pay things for me. And I was like, really? So anything like that, if it's too good to be true, it's too good to be true. Do not give them any information at all. I like to mess with them sometimes and ask them how that would work and how they would verify. And if I have time, I'll just talk to them for a while. But yeah, anytime they ask you for something and it's too good to be true, don't believe it. Okay, so what I did tell you that I was going to share more resources with you at the end, and I was going to give you an opportunity to scan that QR code again. So if you've heard all this great stuff and now you're like, you know what, I do want a Regions banker to contact me, but you took it earlier and you're like, no, I don't want a Regions banker to contact me. It doesn't matter. You can do it twice. You can scan the QR code, put in the banker ID, take the little 8-question self-evaluation. It's only 8 questions, takes you less than 2 minutes. And then the very last question at the end says, would you like a Regions banker to follow up with you? That's the second option. You pick that, and then you put in your contact information, and a Regions banker reaches out to you within 48 hours, and they can talk to you about how to set up that positive pay or single sign-on or anything like that. Oh yes, absolutely. How to save the chat. So there's 3 little dots to the right of the chat. You can see where it says like to everyone, and there's a piece of paper, a smiley face, and then 3 little dots. You have the option right there to save chat. Now make sure when you save it, you open it somewhere so you know. So it just says chat save check mark. Then you can actually click the little button that says show in folder, and you can save it where you want. So click the 3 little dots to the right. Let me know if you have any issues. I'll be here. I'll stay here until we do it. Click the 3 little buttons to the right of the chat that says, I'm not seeing 3 little dots. Let me see. Hey TJ, can you with your, yeah, next to the smiley face. Yes, right next to the smiley face. So there's a little on the bottom of the chat, like right above where you type in your chat, there's like a little piece of paper, a little smiley face, and then the 3 little dots.
And what I could do is I could save it, and then if somebody else can't figure out how to save it, um, show 'em
Maybe it's
folder.
only available, I haven't had the problem in the past, but maybe it's only available to panelists then. So TJ, you
Um,
can save it, and if somebody wants it, they can send it out.
yeah, I'm trying to see if I could put the link, the saved file in.
Ah, brilliant.
Well, don't say that just yet.
Hey, while she's working on that, does anybody have any last questions about anything we talked about? I'll also stop sharing my screen because maybe that'll show you the little dots, because now your chat should go to a different spot. Oh, you figured it out.
Well, I
So
just dragged it,
literally,
so hopefully.
literally you can, TJ figured out how to save the chat, put it in a file, and put that in the chat. See, you are brilliant. So you can actually download, on mine, there's a little arrow where I can download the chat and keep it.
I never knew that. So you learn something new every day.
Thank you guys so much for your time. Any questions to end with?
Okay,
I don't see
most
anything
people
so far.
who's attended our webinars, they know I always ask the speaker, what's the one piece of information um, that you would like our clients to know?
Um, I want you to make sure you talk to your bank. It doesn't matter what bank it is. Make sure you talk to your banker and you have a conversation about what security features you have on your account to help prevent you from fraud. They are the experts. So just get them involved and talk to them and make sure that your accounts are safe.
Well, I mean, and no matter what, you should always try to be in communication with your banker. That's why a lot of the times when I'm speaking to clients, I always like try to make that one-on-one type connection, because not only for things like this, but new programs coming out, they'll be knowledgeable about your business and what may fit you better than what you think would fit for your business.
Yeah.
Even just recently with the PPP loans and things like that, get to know your banker, talk to them frequently. If you're at a bank that are not that personable, find another bank. When you're dealing with your small business, you don't want to deal with somebody who is just over the phone or online. You want to deal with people that really, really care about you and your business. um, so absolutely. And I do have the information for the banker from Regions Bank that if anybody wants her information, she was awesome. I met with her yesterday. Um, and she does a lot of one-on-one work with clients as well. So, Megan, if there's no more questions, thank you so much for taking the time today to share such valuable information with our audience. And thank you to the audience for being here, engaging, and asking so many questions. I mean, this was a small group, but we had a lot of questions. Let's see. Pan said, may I suggest to have your bank app on your phone that you can log in just about every day and keep an eye
Absolutely.
on transactions? It is probably after the fact check, but I find it, yes.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
With my bank, I also have the feature that every time a purchase is made, it sends me a text.
Yeah.
It could be irritating, but I don't do it on my personal account. I only do that on my business account. So at least I know when money's coming out of my account, it's me on Amazon and not, somebody else on Amazon.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. Thank you, TJ. I got to run to the next one. So have a great day.
Thank you. Okay, so
Thanks.
I also wanted to share some information about some of our upcoming programs.
Oh,
The
yes.
next Small Business Essential webinar is February 1st, Top 5 Things to Know About QuickBooks. And then the next story of coming up is featuring Tafiq Shaw from Lola's Fine Sauces. If you know Lola's, then you know that's going to be a great one. And then Dream Builder starts February 24th. Dream Builder is our signature 8-week business planning course that will help you understand the ins and outs of owning and operating a small business in Iowa. Not only will you create a thoughtful business plan, but you'll work with subject matter experts, established small business owners, and a cohort of peers who will provide support as you build the foundation to launch your business. If you would like more information, feel free to check our website at www.theiowacenter.org. Did we get disconnected? Oh, I think Megan had to leave, so hopefully you could still see and hear me. But with that, I'll close with my one piece of advice that I have for all of us, and that is to love what you do and do what you love. With that, I'll end this session. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Shelley.